What's the craziest, most inappropriate thing a coworker has said to you in the workplace? I started a new job and I told my hiring manager that I preferred the men's uniform shirts to the women's polo style. I didn't give my reasoning, but for the sake of any readers, and this was because there were buttons on the placket for the men's, whereas the women's were open, not even just the normal placket without buttons either. It was a V neckline on a polo shirt that was deep enough to show an uncomfortable amount of cleavage. My chest could be described as bountiful, and the length if the men's were reasonable and didn't have unnecessary princess seams to make it tighter, or a cropped bottom that prevented tucking. I prefer to tuck my work shirts. The hiring manager responded, "You lesbians get crazier and crazier. Already wearing pants, now you can't even wear the shirts designed for you." I thanked him for his time and walked down to HR, where I had just received my office access card. Insisted that I do an exit interview with the lovely lady in the office, and then I dropped my shiny new access card and walked away. I had received another job offer the day prior, thankfully that I hadn't responded to yet. Best snap decision I've ever made. I've worked with that company and an amazing team of people for the past 7 years now. Story 2. In 1987, I worked as a receptionist and word processor. Yes, that was what secretary was called at the time for a title company that employed 4 or 5 guys that were a few years older than me. I answered phones and typed up contracts and made copies of legal documents. The owners were 3 middle-aged men with wives and children, and the rest of the employees were single men in their late 20s. Within 6 weeks of working there, I was groped, joked with, hit on, talked lewd to, told I smelled like I just had sex, told I could make extra money as a stripper at a well-known strip club if I lost some weight first, followed into the bathroom and asked to cover for each of them when their side girls called. They would openly talk about their sexual conquests at the time. Was a major big deal and topic of conversation. I finally got the guts to complain in tears to one of the bosses who seemed horrified of the things I was telling him at the time. He assured me he would do something about it and apologized profusely. That was a Friday. He told me to take off the rest of the day and Monday since I was so upset and he would handle it. I was so hopeful and relieved. I remember thinking that I would be able to come to work the next week and not worry about what I was going to have to deal with. On the following Tuesday, I came into the office, eager to get on the right foot, and found my desk empty. My stuff was in a box in the break room. Seems I was temporarily reassigned. Also, I found out that after I left on Friday, he had called in the gits all together, and they as a group did not deny their behavior, but claimed that because I had laughed at the time and not complained when the events happened, that I was as much to blame and therefore couldn't work with them. By the next day, I was replaced, and by Friday, my position had been eliminated. Story 3. First week on the job in HR, and the most inappropriate person I ever worked with in my entire career proceeded to tell me about the time she let her husband do some stuff and poop came out. Not going to lie, I laughed my ass off, but wondered if I was dreaming story 4. Not said to me, but in my presence and about 10 other people. I worked as a radiographer in a veterinary teaching hospital. We had a group of students for 2 weeks at a time, and things were usually pretty mellow and fun working with these students. Our manager of the rad techs was the daughter of a different university professor and had a tendency to open her mouth and say inappropriate things, like about her husband taking Viagra and Ambien at the same time, and the consequences thereof. This I will leave to your imagination. Fridays were sometimes quieter, and this particular afternoon we were sitting in the reading room with the radiologists and the students, looking at images, learning, and hanging out. A radiologist was looking at some referral films sent in by an outside veterinarian for our radiologist to interpret. These films were sometimes entertaining because of how poorly done they were, or how many images they would put on a single cassette. This one was of the latter type, an 18x20 film with 8 or 10 images of a small bird, turned every which way so the film had to be turned a different way to look at each individual image. My supervisor spotted this and said, "Wow, that guy must be a Jew." All of us said nothing, and 2 of the students sitting in the room were Jewish. Since no one reacted, she repeated it again, louder. This time we all decided to be somewhere else. She was made to apologize to the students, which she did through crocodile tears, all the while wondering aloud what she said was so bad. As far as I know, the Karen still works there. Never ever work in academia, if you can help it, unless you're already a doctor or something and therefore untouchable. That place dumped me and some other people that I suspect were making too much money, still not much, were older, and they could hire new graduates with certification that I didn't have, but I had decades of experience for less money. I still hope that university loses every single game of every kind they participate in until the earth falls into the sun. Story 5. When I was pregnant with my first kid, I had a rough first trimester. Very bad morning sickness, nauseous every morning, and threw up in my office garbage can more times than I care to remember, and I was also completely exhausted and had low energy all of the time. I disliked my job as an executive assistant at a large corporation where there was zero chance of ever being promoted, and my two bosses were high maintenance, so I'm sure I seemed especially surly when I felt so physically. I wasn't planning to tell anyone until I was 12 weeks along or more, but I realized I might get into trouble at work for slacking unless they knew what was going on with me. I asked my former boss, who I adored, what she thought I should do. She agreed that telling my bosses would be helpful in my current state. So I told them. The male boss had grown children when I told him that he was happy for me. My female boss, who was a bigger pain in the ass and child-free, which might explain her attitude. When I told her, she looked at me and said in a kind of nasty tone, "You don't look pregnant." Well, I was 8 weeks along and no one looks pregnant so early. Did she think I was lying about being pregnant to get away with being crafty at my job? Wouldn't it eventually come out that I wasn't pregnant in a matter of time if I was lying? I was very insulted because I was so happy to be pregnant. Didn't want to tell anyone yet. My ex-husband didn't even want us to tell our moms and my best friend until we were sure we were in the clear. But I was in a tough decision where I feared for my job, so I had to tell my two least favorite people in the world, and one thought I was lying. Story 6. Spent a lot of time communicating with clients over the phone. I was also the only woman in the office, and the youngest by about 20 years. Never saw clients in person. Boss met up with said clients at dinner, then reported back the next day in front of several coworkers that they said I had a sexy voice and that they wanted to know if I was hot. I'm pretty sure my boomer boss thought I'd be flattered when I replied with, "Oh, and what did you tell them?" He realized that he was in trouble. Whether it was because he realized that it was inappropriate or because I'm very overweight, i.e. not hot. And he may have said that I wasn't, I don't know, but he immediately dropped the conversation. My coworkers had my back. At least 2 of them tore shreds off him for being gross. Story 7. One woman's responses to the basic question, "How are you?" with, "Not good, I'm bleeding through everything." Not good, if had sex with me again last night when I was asleep, woke up this morning, and very graphic description of fluids. Same company, a woman called off because she'd just shaved at her BF's request and she couldn't stand anything next to her skin. Same company, a woman explained being late by a description of being in the shower with her BF and he liked it from behind. Me? Just oversleeping, traffic, not enough caffeine, didn't ask for any of that. Story 8. So I was working a sweet internship while going through school and we all were laid off unexpectedly. Next day I had to scramble to look for a night job to cover the bills so I could still go to school during the day. I answered an ad for an insurance company to help out in the print room overnight. The other employees that I joined were bananas. This older guy had no filter. After a couple of shifts, when we're all buddy-buddy, I was being friendly in a new place till I figured out what was what. This guy thought my friendliness was like, "Now we are best friends." So this older guy, on our Friday, starts going on about how if I want to make a lot of money, I should quit the insurance company and go to work in adult films, like how that would be more money than a salaried position. He was talking about it in front of the other 3 people that were on the shift, and they are nodding along like this is a normal and good idea. I was so taken back, I didn't even know what to say to that. I think I said something like, I didn't think about that. Over time, he stopped talking to me because I wanted to do a good job and he was all about doing the minimum. He knew how to do everything on all the different printing machines. He could have been a superstar, but chose not to, bananas. Never did look into that lucrative adult industry option. Story 9. I was working for a tow truck company and was hired to run the front office. There was a dispatcher and a bookkeeper too. The 3 of got close after a few months and then the dispatcher quit. The first replacement we hired was a really nice lady, had been a som to 3 boys. On her second day, she came back from lunch and told us that she had gone home for lunch and found her living room curtains closed, and she knew she had opened them that morning. She thought her teenage son had ditched school, so she snuck inside to catch him, and instead caught her husband pleasure himself. At my current job, my favorite coworker, who has since been fired, not long after I started working there, randomly told me I have to give BJ. One day, she was also hanging out in the lobby and randomly and very loudly announced that she is bipolar, depressed, and on antipsychotics. And she also had flings going with a couple guys from the kitchen and openly talked about it at work. I worked the front desk at the time, and she would hang out there a lot, and as soon as she walked into work, she would talk about her personal life. So she openly admitted that she harassed these guys by sending them nudes, and she talked about the things she did with them, even got pregnant by one. She got fired in part because she talked about all of this in front of residents. Story 10. Girl Scouts is a faith-based organization. It absolutely is ducking not. Girl Scouts is for everyone. Religion is not involved and should not be involved. Literally anyone who has ever worked for any Girl Scout council for more than 2 minutes should know that. Story 11. I had a general manager ask me to vouch for him, that he was tutoring me and another male server with our college algebra. after we closed down the restaurant if his wife asked. He offered to let me off on Halloween if I comply. Later, I found out the male server got $200 and got to leave early on Halloween. I'm the world's worst liar, so it's a good thing she never asked. However, she did come to my work months later with bags of designer clothes and bags to see if I wanted any of it, and hung out just chatting. It was midday and very slow. She grilled me about a hostess and Mike's work schedule. He never instructed me to say anything to her if asked about these things, so I answered her questions about the hostess and what time we left after closing. My responses got him kicked out of the house, and he was literally sleeping on the cushioned benches at the restaurant for a week or so. My auntie was across the street, so I gave him the key to go shower just to find out he ducked my roommate while over there. I hope his wife moved on. She was gorgeous and so sweet. Ex-model personal trainer that inherited a lot of money. She could do much better than that creep. Story 12. I am male and was in my mid-40s when this happened. I had just become part of my company's senior leadership team and was discussing performance metrics at a corporate board meeting. We are in the Fortune 100 and have about 60,000 employees. Most people have never heard of us because what we do is not sexy. Anyway, I'd made my mark as the math nerd with some degree of a personality. I gave an impassioned presentation on all of our metrics, why they mattered, and how they were trending. After I finished, we broke for lunch. A very attractive female former employee of mine approached me as I left the boardroom and said, "I've never seen you like that before. Did you get hard while doing that because I got wet watching you?" The head of HR and POU these days was within earshot and just yelled, "What the hell?" In a rare moment of being cool, I made eye contact HR guy, simply pointed at Miss Wet and walked off. Heard him asking her, "What is wrong with you?" but don't know what else was said. I so wanted to tell that story to anyone who would listen in the office, but figured nothing good would come of that. I'm now retired, but still hang periodically with HR COO guy. Topic comes up every year or so. Story 13. We had an all-day staff meeting, mandatory, and actually a retreat. Basically, it was an all-day party. It was at a higher-up's gorgeous house on the water. I was brand new. I got a ride with a coworker. I had no idea hot tubs can assist you along when drinking. Also, I never ate breakfast. So I'm in the hot tub, drinking, jumping into the water to cool off and back into the hot tub. I got pretty tipsy. Yeah, I ate, but it was too late. I was the life of the party there for a while. I probably would have been embarrassed the next day, but my behavior wasn't that bad. My ride told me it was time to leave, so I went into the changing bedroom. I was by buck-ass naked when my boss came in. I quickly grabbed a towel and covered up. He took a few steps and kissed me. I was drunk in my 20s. This was my first essay. I said something about my ride, about he couldn't be in here. Everyone would know. He was married. Eventually, he left. I never encouraged him. I got dressed. This blew me away. Now I'm totally drunk. I leave with my ride. Story 14. I was working on a team of 4, and my manager was a super religious Church of God member, which I absolutely would never hold against anyone as I'm a Christian myself. My mom had just passed and I lost a baby, which I had to tell my manager because I had to have some treatment at the hospital for it. I took one day off of work for it. When I returned, we were in her car on the way to a client meeting when she said, totally unprompted, "You know, it seems pretty obvious to me that God doesn't want you to be a mom. There must be something about your character that makes him not want to trust you with a child. I think it's time to let go of what you want and walk in his will." I was speechless. We didn't have an HR department, and our only HR rep went to her church. I told the principal of our agency and he said it was out of line, but he couldn't say anything to her because he couldn't afford to lose anyone from the team, and I guess she had one foot out the door anyway. But yeah, that was wild. Story 15. I've got a couple. At one previous job, taking while working was discouraged, as they believed it only served as a distraction. A coworker decided to start up a conversation with me, eventually going on a tangent about her intimate life with her and asked me to share about mine. I declined to entertain this line of questioning and reminded her we shouldn't be talking about this, or technically at all. I was later called to our manager's office, told I was being written up for harassment, that I was not allowed to know the who or what, that I was not allowed to explain my side of the matter, and that I would be fired if I refused to sign the write-up. While I applaud the manager for taking the issue seriously, it was unsettling at best. Them at my last job. During the beginning of 2020, the climate of the office became even more aggressively political than it already had been. After the election results, the riot, and the inauguration, it only got worse. Then, a manager basically bragged to me about how he had bullied a young black woman who worked in our corporate office into quitting. Why? Because she was kinda liberal, and she doesn't support President Trump, who, by that point, had not been the president for nearly a year. Story 16. Non-sexual. I used to have a federal job, and my supervisor thought it was a good idea to ask me who I voted for in the general election. When I refused, she said she deserved to know, and then I hung up on her. I immediately called a colleague, and there would be a record of her wildly inappropriate question. The next day, she called me in a panic, claiming that her foot hurt, and that was the reason why she asked. Story 17. In my 20s, 20 years ago, I had a bar manager who would pull out his balls through his zipper and then walk over to you and discuss something work-related until you noticed. The other employees would be laughing and watching. It's hard to believe it ever happened now, but it did. Story 18. My coworker had just come back from visiting Cuba. He was telling us about it. It was him, another guy coworker, and me, a female. He was telling us all he did, telling us about his family and about all the good food. He then says, "Coworker's name, you should come with me next time. You can get a girl any age you want." Our mouths dropped. My coworker had a daughter. We were utterly disgusted. He looked at us and tried to tell us that it wasn't a big deal. He paid, so they were all right. We both walked away and looked at each other like he ended up getting fired because he sent me a junk pic through a website where on his profile, he had his name, where we all worked, and the city we worked in. I went to management, and he was fired immediately. The crazy part about it was when I printed it out, just to make sure he didn't delete it before I could report him, I was running out of ink and had to draw most of it. My manager was, again, disgusted. This was before screenshots and cell phones with cameras. Email had just become a thing. Story 19. I asked a coworker how her cruise went after I'd given her an anti-nausea band to wear on the cruise, and a couple tips because it was her first one. The first thing out of her mouth was, "It was all right, but every night your skin color people got into fights." That's exactly how she said it verbatim because it's forever etched in my memory. It was so abrasive and not at all what I expected to come out of her mouth. I just said, "Oh, that's unfortunate," because I was too stunned to say anything else, ATM, and I also didn't want to say something that would lead to me getting into trouble. This was in a hair salon in a podunk southern town, and she was in no way about to be reprimanded by our boss for what she said. I think about it a lot because I just should let her have it, BC. I eventually quit BC. The vibes of the whole salon were so off and tension really thick between all the girls. Again, will I let a comment like that slide? Especially when I was genuinely being nice. Story 20. I'm a manager at a convenience store. We had a longtime African-American young woman employee. She came to me one day to inform me that the newest employee, a white, trailer trashy kind of gal, was throwing the slurs around. I immediately went to talk to the new lady. I took her aside and said, "So, it has come to my attention that you liberally use the slurs, and that was not acceptable as our employee." She spent a lot of time telling me how I was wrong. She didn't mean any harm and was ready to explain it to anyone who took it the wrong way. I told her that she had to stop. She kept telling me, quite pleasantly, that I was wrong and anyone else who didn't like it was wrong, and she would be happy to explain to the other employees why they were just taking it the wrong way. I couldn't gain any ground with this lady and finally just had to tell her it wouldn't be tolerated in our workplace, and she had to stop no matter whether she agreed or disagreed. Story 21. New company takes over the facility, sends an HR team to do policy training, paperwork, etc. for all of us that stayed with the facility during the transition. About 2 hours into the diversity training, which was rather repetitive and boring, there was a brief break for any questions, clarifications. My filter between brain and mouth was not as well developed at the time and was often disengaged. So I popped off with the question, "So what you're telling us is that the ideal job candidate would be a lesbian with a wooden leg?" Dead silence for a few seconds. Take a break and I get to have a little one-on-one with the HR rep, informing me of the error of my ways. Managed to stick with things, since I'm still with the same company 19 years later, in gradually increased responsibility roles. Was in a meeting about 12 years after the incident, and the same HR rep was there. She told me that she still couldn't believe I had said that, but still thought it was one of the funniest damn things she had encountered. Story 22. Not too crazy, but shocked me. I work in a tax office. I was a receptionist, then a tax pro. This is my second year as a tax pro, and our office got a new receptionist and new chairs for clients. Well, it's not surprising the chairs had ink pen on them. As a kid who loved to draw and no one noticed he had a pen. Well, I still like to clean the office because it makes me feel good. So I am scrubbing trying to get the ink pen off the vinyl. I chuckle a bit and ask the older receptionist, "Do you have any ideas on how to get this ink off?" I get a snarky look and get told, "I would try elbow grease, but you probably don't know anything about that." Now I know there is a cleaning product called elbow grease, but not in our area. And the look I got told me she was not talking about a cleaning product. I still don't know what her problem was, as I got told by a few people that she was talking bad about me behind my back. Story 23. Sorry, that happened to you, Ope. When ordering uniforms, I told the assistant for MGR I needed a size 8 pants. He said he didn't know they made sizes that big. I felt great after that one. Story 24. I worked at DG. Guy came in drunk all the time. Bar was next door and we were used to his crap. He came in one night with his daughter and granddaughter, so he was in his late 50s for sure. He was older than me by like 30 years. He asked me to come help them find the jello. As soon as I got over there, he put his arm around my waist and started saying dirty things to me. I don't even remember what he said. I stepped back and said, I had a GF, wasn't interested. I don't fight or flight, I freeze. And he said he could change my mind. My manager the next day told me to be more assertive and that I liked the attention. Yeah, thanks. Store manager said I could ban him myself. She was way better. I got to 2 days later and he said he could persuade my boss to let him return. I said if he came back, I would call the police. Felt good banning him. Story 25. When I was 18, I worked as a cashier at a marina. During the winter, we were doing renovations on the store, which required I wear clothing that could get messed up. For weeks, I wore old, loose-fitting jeans that could be torn or get paint stains on them. They weren't flattering, but obviously they weren't meant to be. One day, my coworker, 45M, approached me while we were alone in the store and struck up what was normal conversation for us. Out of nowhere, he said, "Those pants don't look good on you. Don't wear them when we're on the clock together." Like, sir, the audacity he had to think he could control what I wear, let alone that I would listen to him, is insane. This wasn't his only offense. He behaved inappropriately towards me in other ways. This was just one of the more outrageous instances. A message to men: leave women alone, unless you're wanted by them or know how to act. Otherwise, STFU and let us live. Story 26. You're mean and selfish because I told her to stop getting in my desk drawer and stealing my pens bought with my own money because I didn't like what was supplied. Worse was another coworker was told by a different coworker, "I hope you die in a car accident," because she refused to lie for him. Another coworker stole something from me, turned me in for harassment. When I asked her to not do it again, I told her she could keep what she took and I would have given it to her had she asked. She then unlived herself shortly thereafter, and everyone gave me the cold shoulder for months because I upset her. I work in a very traumatized and messed up place. I've got a few years and then I can retire. My job isn't readily found or I'd leave. I just try to do good work, be kind, have healthy boundaries, and leave it at work. Story 27. When I worked corrections, I had a coworker brag about how big his junk was. We were doing a roof check and he just went on and on about how he's so big. I finally had enough and cut him off by asking, "Is this information supposed to make me want to duck you?" He kind of floundered for a minute, and so I went for the jugular and said, "'Cause all I'm hearing is how bad you are in bed." He stopped talking after that and didn't talk to me again, for any reason, for his remaining months before he finally quit. I'm not saying I'm the reason he quit. We had high turnover, but I'm pretty sure it was a factor. Story 28. Dispatched for a towing company for almost as a decade. Had a particularly useless driver come in and describe his last customer as a fat Karen. Told him to never talk to me again and reported him to management. Wasn't even the last time a driver used that word in front of me. I knew I was out of place as a liberal, but goddamn. Story 29. Coup of a software co. To an Eng manager while standing among our employee desks. "Can't one of the Cheeto build this feature real quick?" Eng Mgaro was somewhat startled. "The what?" "Coup. Cheeto. Their junks are orange because they don't wipe the Cheeto dust off their fingers before touching themselves. You know, nerds." Gestures to the desks of engineering staff, edited to add, "So many of these stories could be solved by a loud, 'WTF, did you just say to me?' And it seriously bothers me how impossible it is to do that in most work environments." Story 30. Oh my. This just reminded me of the worst. I was a very young student teacher at a high school doing my student teaching for an older man who never even was in the class, not even once, when I was teaching. He came in to do my evaluation at the end of the semester, and instead of asking questions or giving advice, he told me a story about how he got divorced because his junk was so huge his wife just couldn't have sex comfortably with him. I think I turned the most brilliant shade of red at his story, and I'm certain I couldn't talk. Fortunately, I was never alone with him again. Story 31. We had a 60-something coworker that had a bad habit of oversharing TMI. We were set up for a team meeting with our project lead and a client, and TMI guy was late. He finally comes blustering into the conference room, all red in the face, and blurts out, "I know I'm late, but an ant bit my junk in the porta potty. Sorry." Quiet chaos ensued. Story 32. I worked with this dude that nobody on the campus where I worked liked, and for some reason he was never fired. I reported to the receptionist each morning to get my tasks and his tasks for the day, and he asked her if she wanted to go in the bathroom and do HJ. Receptionist is around my age, and the dude looked just like Shrek. He still didn't get fired for it, and eventually I quit because I couldn't stand being around him all day, every day. Story 33. I'm black, West Indian black, not African. There's a difference. And I was sitting in my office minding my business one day. Our chief financial officer came in during December and screeched, "Happy Kwanzaa!" I pretended not to hear her, in an effort to make her uncomfortable, which it did. She then said my name and I was like, "What do you mean?" She said, "Don't you celebrate Kwanzaa?" I replied, "I never have, didn't even know that was going on." And she turned super red and said, "Oh, I'm sorry." I was like, Okay, I'm gonna get back to work now. Story 34. So many. I graduated college in 1993. My first manager out of college at a bank. Christmas party. I wore a dress with a keyhole back. We're dancing in a group when a slowish song comes on. He takes my hand, gives me a twirl, and starts to slow dance with me. Slides his hand through the keyhole back and says with a surprised tone, "You are wearing a bra." 3 years later, same bank, different department, the regional manager promotes me to a grade 35 position. Minimum salary 35K. He tells me he's leaving me at my grade 6 salary range because I have a husband, so I don't need to make the big money. Same bank on the teller line. A men's club owner comes in to make a deposit. He asked me if I would be interested in mud resting at his club for extra money. I no longer work at a bank. Story 35. One of the dishwashers seen at the restaurant I was a manager of had convinced himself he was in love with me. He would tell me I was pretty, so funny, etc. Didn't think it was a big deal, as it never seemed threatening. Around Christmas one year, he gave me a gift of lace underwear, a box of chocolates, and attempted to kiss me, which I did not allow to happen. I let him know it was extremely inappropriate, and he should not be doing that to anyone in the workplace. He then told me he would quit so that we could be together. IDK what reality he was in. And I pretty much assumed he wouldn't be getting the point then or ever. I let HR know, and he got fired immediately. Story 36. I was having lunch with a group of coworkers one day. The topic of religion came up. I don't recall anything more specific than that. This was 40 years ago. I was the odd one as a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints. Everyone else was Seventh-day Adventist, Catholic, or Protestant. I put my 2 cents in on the conversation. One coworker turned to me and told me, "You have no right to comment because you aren't even Christian." At first, I, and everyone else at the table, went silent. Finally, I said something along the lines of, "Actually, I am Christian. I worship Jesus Christ. His name is even in the name of my church." I stated the name. Someone else spoke up, I think it was my department secretary, and said, "It doesn't matter. Paula has a right to share her opinion regardless of her religion." I thanked her. Story 37. My first full-time job, I worked with an older lady who was a pain in the ass and had no filter. I was a few months pregnant at the time and had really bad morning sickness. So the smart thing for her to do was accuse me of being anorexic. Yes, you read that right. Anorexic. BC, there were times in the morning she could hear me in the employee's bathroom. That's not anorexia. Yes, it is. I hear you puking in the morning. I did manage to make her life miserable a year or two later when I quit to go to a much better job. Apparently, BC of that, she couldn't retire, and so she was pissed at me. She didn't want to leave them short-handed. Story 38. I used to be a mortician. One day I was trying to fasten a bra on a very large woman. I'd done it a million times, but my boss happened to walk in and see me struggling, and he ordered one of the dudes who picks up bodies to assist me, unnecessary and also, I believe, may have been illegal to help in that manner. He got in the way and made it even more difficult. I lifted the woman up in a way that would allow him to fasten the bra on, but he still couldn't do it. I was visibly annoyed. He said, "Sorry about that. I'm much better at taking these things off." Then he winked at me and made a honking sound as he pretended to pinch the woman's breast. I ducking hated it there. Story 39. I worked in a small office of about 20 people. My husband and I, after several years of marriage and very careful saving, were able to buy a very modest house. One of the guys who was about my age and who had a job earning more than me got married. I didn't like this guy, and while I was polite to him, we rarely spoke much beyond greetings. About 6 months after his wedding, he came into my office and told me that his wife and he thought we should be able to loan them the $40K they needed for a down payment on the house they wanted to buy. Story 40. I used to work in an exceptionally conservative industry. The vast majority of companies in this industry still have a work culture that belongs on the set of Mad Men. It's in dire need of an overhaul, but that's just not going to happen anytime soon. My boss, a woman, at the time told me with a straight face that I had to wear heels and a skirt, because how else is anyone supposed to know you're a woman? I was so baffled that I didn't even respond. I just stood up and left. For context, I have proportions that could be described as extreme. I have never and will never be mistaken for a man. Not since puberty hit me like a sack of bricks. Story 41. I was 19, still at uni, and needed to work because my parents weren't financially supporting me. It was my first proper bar pub job, and I was super excited. On the first day, a couple of my colleagues asked if I had met the owner of the pub yet. I hadn't. A couple days later, when I had the pleasure of finally meeting him, the first thing he, a man in his 40s, 50s, said to me was, "Ooh, do you know why you got hired? It's because I love girls." I had no idea what to do, so I just laughed awkwardly and found a way to wander off. He then proceeded to spend months trying to convince me to sleep with him. Story 42. Professional office. A workmate described someone as a chink. When I said that was not okay, they delved into how dumb I was because I didn't know what it meant. My response was that I absolutely knew what it meant, but that I was astonished someone would use that kind of verbiage in a professional setting. I got in trouble for making my coworker feel bad. Story 43. In the late 80s, early 90s, I used to work for a Japanese-American company and had to work with various Japanese managers who were opening branch offices for accounts I handled. One of them fell in love with me, but he was always appropriate. He did tell me I was very beautiful once. We had gone to his apartment to get a present he had bought me in Japan, which he went inside to get while I stayed in the car. And I think he was hoping I would be so smitten I would sleep with him, but he never said anything to suggest I should. Still very uncomfortable, and I was so happy when his wife and kids finally joined him when he opened the branch, which was in Canada, so I didn't have to see him too often after that. Story 44. You shouldn't wear that lipstick. It makes me want to kiss you. You shouldn't wear that dress. Then, when he caught me in the stairwell, can I kiss you? I wanted to vomit. Story 45. When I started my first job as a machinist at 18, I was being trained by this guy in his 40s. He told me men and women's brains work differently, so he wasn't sure I'd be able to handle the job. This was after I'd caught him lying to me again about how to do something, and he acted like I was the biggest idiot. My coworker overheard this and reported him. Nothing really happened to him, and he vaguely threatened me to never tell on him again. Whatever, my girl brain ended up being better at that job than he ever was, even though he constantly tried to sabotage me by teaching me bad information. Story 46. Older guy that I had trained. He was a complainer, but mostly competent, so he tuned it out. He grew up in a local neighborhood and was proud of it. A new company doctor was introduced, and I went to the presentation, talked a bit to her. Nice lady, seemed competent. Asian heritage. An old dude, upon hearing her name, said, "Oh no, I bet she has a terrible accent." Looking him in the eyes, I said, "Yeah, it's really hard to understand her. She grew up in your neighborhood." Old guy blushed and suddenly went to get coffee. Our other team member was dying trying to suppress his laughter. Story 47. In my first job in my 20s, the man I worked for came in one morning and told me, "I had a dream about you last night, but I can't tell you about it." I was thoroughly grossed out and didn't ask. Another time, he had me help him find 3 hidden files on his computer. They were adult film. He was married with 3 kids and a pillar of the community. I was so glad when I was able to quit. Story 48. You obviously got this job because you're a woman. You don't really have any skills. Casually, not even with a mean tone, just a matter-of-fact tone to my face. On the first day at my new duty station, I was so floored that I didn't even have a response. He must have realized he effed up because shortly thereafter my boss approached me and told me the other guy's boss had approached him and told him the employee had confessed to having said that to me, and we needed to discuss corrective action and what I wanted to do. I did, by the way, have plenty of skills and was hired there due to my specific skill set. It was a ridiculous statement. Story 49. "Oh, I'm pretty sure I'm going to win this one." She said, "I must have Down syndrome because I don't drink alcohol." And when I called her out on it with my manager, she told me that I offended her because she doesn't think that there's anything wrong with people with Down syndrome, as people in her family have it. Karen, what? Oh, I still get heated. I left that. Karen in the dust and moved to a better position. She tried to call me for a job, because we are such good friends. I told her I'd rather fall off the Chrysler building and land on a bike with no seat than to ever work with her again. Story 50. I was 20 years old and working for a nonprofit. This older lady who held the same position as me was just so goddamn weird. She'd tell me all the time that I should marry a blonde man because white couples are so cute when they look alike. I'm a white Latina and she was black. Whatever, I chalked it up to weird old lady crap. But then she started on about how I should marry a high-powered man like a doctor or a lawyer because I was textbook submissive housewife material. This woman used the word submissive to describe me on a daily basis until I tried to file an HR complaint. That job was a cluster duck. Story 51. I was an intern at a local TV affiliate while in college. Worked with a curmudgeon-y man. I would guess mid-50s. I'm Asian. He asked what my nationality was. I told him Chinese. He said, good, he has no problem with Chinese. He served in Vietnam and didn't really like Vietnamese people, but he had a lot of escorts, his word, while he was serving, and they were great because they were so subservient. Reporting people wasn't an option then. At least I didn't think so. Story 52. I used to work out in the chemical plant, so the worst thing said to me was harassment. Dude offered to help me in the restroom. He was more graphic, but I'll let you use your imagination. The good thing that came from that was I saw how many people I worked with, and around that, said it was unacceptable. They helped me file complaints and protected me till he was run off. Story 53. This occurred when I was working my first job at a retail store. I wore a very modest white t-shirt with a tank underneath just because I was cautious. It was pouring rain outside, and we needed someone to go get the shopping carts from outside. One of the older co-workers told me to go get them, so I could start a white t-shirt contest for them. We wore vests over our clothes, and he told me to make sure I took off the vest for the full affect. A few of my coworkers did not like that he said that to me, and he was gone shortly after that. Story 54. I was in the cash office at the Mart of Walls. Each night, the managers had to count and sign off on the cash deposit as being correct. The manager came in, plopped his fat butt in a chair, and asked why do all you girls in the cash office have such big's boob? And I answered, to make up for your small junk. He got up and walked out without verifying the deposit. I did go to HR and was told he didn't mean anything by it. And that is why I no longer shop at mall warts. Story 55. I had an employer tell me that I should wear short skirts, heels, and nylons, because I would make both of us a lot more money. I was working a retail Redwood Burl showroom on the edge of San Francisco Bay. Half of the showroom was an outdoor gravel lot for raw slabs. Most of the year, the temperature hovered in the upper 40s, rising to the 50s during the fall. Yes, weird, but that's North California coastal weather for you. So, heels on gravel, short skirt, and nylons in 40-degree F weather. Needless to say, I ignored his suggestion. I later reported his business to a federal agency. Story 56. Worked in a medical transcription pool years ago. One coworker decided it was getting a little hot and stuffy in the room where we were working, about 6 or 8 people and a dozen or so computers. She took her shirt off. She sat there in her bra, doing transcription. It took a while before we could talk her into putting her shirt back on. We found out much later that she suffered from bipolar disorder and she was on something of a manic episode when she did that. Story 57. In my early 20s, I worked in a small plastics factory. The owner came in one day and asked me if I was a dancer. My response, "What do you mean? Are you asking if I do ballet?" He told me no. He wanted to know if I was a stripper. I let him know that if I was a stripper, I wouldn't be working in the hellhole factory for an aide at hole like him. He proceeded to offer that if I got a job as a stripper, he would pay me every night the amount I made in a week in the factory. I told him to go F himself. Story 58. I was a student paying to go to a university and working a fast food job for a second job. When I needed time off to go to mandatory class event, my manager told me I needed to get my priorities straight. I said, I have them straight, then quit. I went back home to work for my former fast food job, 5 years, and had kept it for holidays and summer work, to find that she had moved there to work. After I got back, my coworkers were told about what happened to me, and she lasted about 1 month before quitting. Story 59. Many years ago, I was a train engineer for a commuter railroad. One day, the conductor came up to the operating cab between stations, sits down, and starts eating a snack. After a few minutes of silence, he says out of the blue, "You know, it's never too late to give up your sinful lifestyle and be saved." I was floored. Dude, I'm at the controls of a train carrying hundreds of people, and you think now's the time? Reported him to HR, and I was never scheduled with him again. Story 60. My first legal job as I worked illegally as a child to survive had a woman who decided that it was appropriate to tell me to just take your top off and let me see your tits. I chose to decline, and then was told a woman can't harass a woman. Then went to HR despite my mother because she was wrong about most things, so clearly one could. Story 61. Coworker got an accidental junk pic text while at work and thought the guy was hot enough to respond. Asked for my help picking out a nude to send him. To be fair to her, she had either had rampant, untreated ADHD or she was on substances, so I'm not even surprised. She always uses to twerk and drop it low at the Pixis as well. Good times. Story 62. 1. The owner of the AM radio station asked me if I was pregnant, alluding to the top I was wearing. I said no, I don't plan on that anytime soon. He said accidents happen. He fired me a few months later for something else. 2. In retail, an ASM was telling me about a conversation he had with our GM about my sales abilities and complimented me with my ability to sell ice to an Eskimo. Story 63. At my last job, I had a coworker tell me she thought she had herpes, then proceeded to show me pictures of her, with the symptoms. This was while we were on our lunch break, eating our lunch. Story 64. When I was in my 20s, a coworker told me if I expected to borrow his truck to move furniture, which he offered in the first place, I'd have to go out with him. When I said no, he went off about how I'd give my boss some trim, but not him. I investigated and found out that my boss had told all the men on the staff that I slept with him on a work trip. I quit. Story 65. I work in a team with 50-60 guys. I'm at times the only girl, and believe me, I've seen and heard it all. I've had junk pics randomly sent to me. I've been called an escort in front of others for refusing someone's advances. I've had men declare their love all while being married to their wives. I've had a boss tell me he will put me 6 foot under if I disobey him again. Oh, and one guy used to answer me over the two-way with a wolf whistle. Honestly, I could write a book. Story 66. Well, my manager on my door-to-door sales team would send pictures every morning to the group chat of his filled-out goals sheet. We were all supposed to do it. Turns out he was doing this on the toilet and didn't check. Nothing else was in frame. One morning he sent a picture and you could see more than his goals sheet. He didn't know how to delete the picture from the chat, so he ended up deleting the whole chat and started a new one. Not before the whole team saw, and several commented on it. Story 67. I had a coworker, out of nowhere, tell everyone I was sleeping with the entire male staff at the store we worked at the time. Meanwhile, I was in a very serious relationship and planned on moving to be closer to him. I still have no clue why she did this and why people believed it. I was friends with several of the men, but they all knew about my boyfriend. Story 68. As a 23-year-old female researcher for a nonprofit I walked into an after-work reception for donors because they were there to learn about a project I was involved in. The president of our 400-person introduced himself to me thinking I was a donor. I quickly corrected him. I'm wearing my badge and standing with 2 male colleagues, but whatever. Somehow the president thinks he can improve things with a little joke. Of course, I didn't recognize you with your clothes on. People got away with that crap in teeny 90s. Story 69. I worked with container ships in a very niche job in one of the busiest ports in the world. These ships arrive and depart at all hours and days of the week. Holidays be damned. I'd been working on weekends and holidays to meet up with the ships that I worked with, and one of my bosses, who really didn't understand what I did, disliked that I was working outside of business hours without supervision. He told me to ask the ships if they could come in during regular business hours. Story 70. After reading some of these, I feel like it's important to know that HR has to follow federal law. So any harassment based on protected categories, this includes harassment, which can be how someone perceives what is said and feels uncomfortable, not just outright insulting harassment. If there is no HR, small company, owner loves the obnoxious person, or it's the owner's family member, these are still federal laws and you can report the behavior to the state, who will absolutely investigate. Burn them to the ground. Story 71. My one coworker propositioned me. He said he was in dead bedroom and picked up on me and I was interested. Totally disgusting. He had been harassing for the few years I'd been working there, including buying me expensive perfume. After that, I turned him in for harassment. They ended up firing me, but I sued them through the state and they settled. This was back in 1991 to 1994. Story 72. I had a coworker grab my upper thigh while I was working on his computer. I firmly told his ass to remove his hand and walk next door to report it. Needless to say, his problem was not my problem for the foreseeable future. I was the sole it person. Story 73. A woman at work told me she didn't appreciate me bringing satanic books to work to read on my lunch break. I had no idea what she was talking about. It seems my true crime books are satanic. I told her they aren't satanic. They're just books about crime, which is a thing, and it interests me. She said, well, it's not very Christian of you. I said, I'm not Christian. This shocked her, and she just walked away from me like I'd grown a tail and horns. Story 74. I'll never forget a fellow teacher saying to me, in the midst of his wife, a former student of his when they lived in a nearby state, filing for divorce. The most discriminated against group in America are males. I disagreed with him. He later lost his job and career due to some disclosed improper behavior with a female a few years back. Story 75. Holy crap. Y'all have some seriously crafty experiences and I'm so sorry. My example isn't overly horrible, but it definitely rendered me speechless for a few seconds. I'd been at the job for 2 weeks when a woman I had met once came to me and if I'd help her with something. I said sure, obviously expecting it to be work-related. Nope, she wanted me to put her nose ring back in for her. I'm not really comfortable doing that. Sorry. Story 76. We worked in clusters of desks. I and the guy opposite me were in our 50s. We just got word that a former coworker had died of a heart attack. The guy opposite me, who had always been pleasant enough to me, said loudly and happily, "Ha! He smoked and he was fat. He deserved it." I am also fat. It felt like a punch to the head. He never noticed my shock. I certainly never dealt with him in the same way again. Story 77. I was 5 months pregnant, and our HR coordinator stopped me into the break room to ask where my colleague was. He was working while I made yet another snack. She then let me know my male colleague and I were such good friends. She wasn't 100% convinced my growing baby belonged to my husband. I was told to let it go, and that she didn't mean anything by it. Story 78. I working at a state agency. After months of harassment, I resigned. In my last couple of weeks, one of the officers said, "You know we're going to make love at least once before you leave, right?" Story 79. I was driving taxi. I went to the office to use the bathroom. Male dispatcher asks if I can do him a favor. I say sure, what's up? He says, "Can you scratch my balls? They're really itchy." I told him to go duck himself. Then he says, "If your boobs were itchy, I'd scratch them for you." I quit 6 weeks ago. Story 80. My first day at a pizza place, one of the dishwashers told me, "If your wife calls the police on you for domestic assault, just leave the house." He would go to SF on the weekends to gay clubs because we suspected he was closeted bi. We would catch him just staring at male coworkers and myself all the time. Told a female coworker why you didn't wear your yoga pants today. Story 81. A coworker sent me an unsolicited picture of her hemorrhoid that was causing her to miss work. We didn't work in the same office. I had no idea she was missing work. Story 82. This is one of many things, but the general manager of a trucking company walked into a lowly safety assistant's cubicle. I asked him if he was looking for manager. He said no. He was just checking out the old bullpen. My dumb, autistic ass said, "Oh, okay." I was the only one in the bullpen, and he just stared at me for a while. I was so confused I didn't realize it was harassment. I just thought he was old and weird. Story 83. Long time ago, but a district manager told me to my face I would need to take care of him if I wanted that promotion. Prior to that, same company, boss wanted to promote me and was told no because I was a pretty married female and soon would be leaving to have babies. Their manager turnover was insane. I was putting my husband through dental school and would be there at least 3 more years, about 3 to 4 times longer than most managers. Story 84. I was working a temporary warehouse job and the manager was a sleaze. He would boast about getting his wife drunk and incapacitated so he could have sex when she refused. He made comments about my boobs and ass, but the worst was when he said he was going to duck me, then went into great detail about how my body was going to react to his. I just stared at him, then went to get my purse and started walking the 25 miles home. Story 85. The person who trained me at my current position once asked, "You don't change your own oil? Did your dad walk out on your family when you were little or something?" Story 86. We were getting ready for trial. My boss and I disagreed about which witness to use to explain our client's insurance product. Boss wanted to use the guy involved in selling the actual policy. He gave off a sketchy used car salesman vibe. I suggested another agent, who came across as more honest, friendly, etc. Boss's response to my suggestions was, "We aren't picking witnesses based on who you want to fuck." Story 87. I had a very stupid principal who only lasted 1 year in our district. He encouraged teachers and students to wear costumes to school on Halloween. I had not arrived yet when he told one of my best friends I should come as a wanton. He'd only known me since August, and he also knew I was a newlywed. This was before anyone gave 2 craps about harassment or anything related, so I had to just let it go. Story 88. 1. You're not permitted to speak in my meeting. There were over 100 people in a conference. I was the only female voice that spoke the entire 4-hour conference. I said "Taichualu" sentences. 2. You should sacrifice yourself to him. A supervisor was encouraging me to have sex with a man. 3. You know that dress makes me want to duck you. Calm down, sir. It was a professional dress. Story 89. I came from a male coworker who I reported twice for harassment. I was upset at a printer that wasn't printing a proof correctly. I had to retry more than 8 times. The male coworker said, "It's pretty when you're angry. I could lick the anger off of you." I froze and just went back to working with the printer. Even with incidents like this, he didn't face any harsh repercussions, especially when he's been reported by multiple people multiple times. Story 90. During a staff meeting, my boss told me that we could all be replaced by trained monkeys. It was one of those meetings where one person had royally fucked up, but they chose to punish everyone. I told my boss that if she could find a monkey with a master's degree in microbiology so that she could meet regulatory requirements to go right ahead. Story 91. I was in internal audit for a large temp agency trying to determine whether we had double billed a customer. I was on the phone with the district manager in charge of that region. If they paid both bills, can't we just keep the money? After gaping like a fish for several seconds, I asked if he was seriously endorsing fraud as a best practice to an internal auditor. The ensuing backpedaling was epic. Story 92. Same company, 2 different incidents, 2 different managers. 1. Female manager asked if I would let her kiss me. 2. Male manager, while on a business trip and driving a rental car, smoke and asks me if I want some. Was not interested in either. Story 93. We were being laid off in a few weeks and talking about things in our lives that changed us, like a job loss. I mentioned that when I got pregnant, it was unexpected, but that having my daughter had made me more determined to do well in life, so she had a good childhood and that she was a blessing in disguise. My coworker looked at me and said completely seriously, "Obviously, your definition of a blessing and mine are entirely different." Story 94. Worked at an insurance office with several agents and their assistants. One of the agents was a fat, married, mid-60-year-old dude who was always over-jovial and slightly ick. One day, I was coming around the corner with a handful of files and almost bumped into him. He put his hands up right in front of my boobs, made a squeezing motion and mumbled, "Don't squeeze the charmin'. Just gross." Story 95. Worked in a chemical lab. Male boss asked me every morning if I had sex last night. Told me he only hired me to look at my legs and I should wear a dress, and on it went. I made a formal complaint and got shifted elsewhere on the company. Turned out he had harassed every woman he ever worked with. Most left or requested internal transfers. Story 96. I had a supervisor at the bank I worked at asked me if I gave my husband BJ in front of the entire female teller line. After a discussion with his supervisor, he was promoted to branch manager at a different location because they had to move him to make me feel comfortable. Story 97. My underperforming associate jokingly called me their manager, his secretary, every time I had to step in and fix their mistakes in front of customers. I genuinely believe they thought that they were being cute, but it was incredibly awkward for both me and the customers. He somehow didn't realize that him needing a secretary just to help him do his basic job responsibilities and often avoid legal errors should have been embarrassing. Story 98. I was once partnered with a colleague one shift, and this was a day after me and my ex had broken up rather messily. It came up in conversation, and then he decided it was appropriate to ask if he could buy nudes off me since I'm single now. Story 99. My store manager at Starbucks bragged that her husband, at the time, told her if she gave him a BJ every day, she would never have to work another day in her life. Duck, yes. I included this in my formal complaint to the district manager. Pretty sure she received no repercussions either. About a year later, her husband caught her and another store manager screwing in the parking lot at her new store. Story 100. Former director of the Lake Erie Research Center told me I was stupid and crazy for being pregnant. Then she regaled me with her stories of when she did research while she was pregnant. But that was different because it was her, and she's special. Did I mention she is no longer the director? Story 101. At my first office job. One day I was with the boss in his car. He had dropped off a truck at the repair shop. I had followed in his car. On our way back to the office, he told me he had a dream about me, and I was wearing a green bikini. What's the most unprofessional thing you've done at work? Story 1. I used to work at a hotel for 7 years as a front desk agent. The job I did was very repetitive. I would check the guest in, have them fill out a registration form, hand them a parking pass, and keys to the room. Well, one day as I was checking in a guest, I handed her the registration form for her to fill out. I would tell every guest the same lines every day. Please write your first and last name, address, phone, email, how many vehicles, license plate, make, model, and state. If you don't know your license plate, go ahead and just write the make, model, and state. As I was about to say theses line, I began thinking about a lemon detox diet thing my mom had told me about BC. I wanted to drop a few pounds. I got to the part, if you don't know your license plate, you can go ahead and lose some weight. She was like, pardon? I then realized I had just ducked up. I began stuttering, unable to fix what I just said, trying to apologize. The worst part was, this lady was morbidly obese. Story 2. I've had some very dead-end retail/food service jobs in my life, the kind of places that wouldn't really recognize professionalism when they saw it in the first place. So generally, I would contribute to shrink, got moved from 30-40 hours a week as a line cook at artisanal sandwich place to 8-hour week unloading the bi-weekly truck shipments into the fridge because the new manager decided I was being paid too much per hour to work the line. I responded by setting a couple of full boxes of food, non-perishable, frozen stuff, out with the trash and picking them up later. Figured that if they weren't going to pay me enough to eat on, they could pick up the slack and feed me. While I was working there, I got this next job, worked at an all-night diner that would routinely schedule 4 servers for an overnight shift that might see 2 tables an hour for the entire restaurant for that time. Asked them for Thanksgiving weekend off to go camping for a friend's birthday. Got scheduled only that week with an average of 4 other servers on the 8:10 P46A shift with me. Came in at 8 on Thanksgiving. No customers in the restaurant. When I walked in, no customers through the door at all for 2 hours, the other 4 servers on shift playing cards at a table near the back. The dishwasher, because we needed one of those on shift too, had the back door open for some cleaning-related reason. I clocked out, grabbed a boxed chocolate cake out of the freezer, headed out and around to my car, and drove out to see my friend. Before those, though, I worked at a major chain arts and crafts store in their little picture framing department. The place was poorly run, and as a non-management male employee, I was a pretty constant target. So, as you probably expect by now, I decided that I would take my cues for job performance from my manager's behavior. That store sold about 40 different colors of Prismacolor pencils as individual pieces. My GF at the time acquired a new full set over the course of a week or two. I also collected a full set of the 165 different colors of commercially available Sharpie markers. My last major acquisition was a 60 CE bag of $1 Jingle Bells, which I wrapped in my apron and marched out the door 4 feet from my manager at closing time to see if I could pass the Foot Clan Ninja test. The best of these stories, though, isn't directly about me. Before all of these, I worked at a major chain hardware store whose general manager retired after the store inventory in February. We didn't get a new general manager until June. When the new guy came in, we had a store-wide meeting about how this was the worst store in the district. No crap. And how he had been sent in from corporation to turn the place around. Good luck. Of the 7 cashiers the place employed when the new guy arrived, I was the only one who ever set foot in that store after that meeting. And not coincidentally, the only one who hadn't been padding his wallet from the till. During close that night, the head of the power tools department showed me the fairly wide camera hole in the PT section. He explained how he'd been setting up display toolboxes by pulling the larger boxes out of their cardboard packaging and setting the cardboard out by the dumpster, with thousands of dollars worth of power tools stashed inside them, which he was reselling on eBay. He claimed he'd made about $15K this way over the Feb-June stretch. This was in 2003. We weren't even really friends, so I nodded along and offered up the occasional wow or dang while internally debating the report internal theft reward. I never got the chance, though. Like the cashiers, that was his last night in the building, and if the rumors were true, the city. I blame him for the other 3 stories. Story 3. So during high school and some of college, I worked at a bowling alley. Some of the regular league bowlers were old alcoholic holes, and the owners of the place were too busy trying to rip everyone off to bother fixing any of the broken crap around there. One league night, everyone had finished, except these 2 teams that were both taking forever to bowl their games. I was a pin monkey mechanic and had to stay in the back with the machines while league was going on just to catch problems before they happened and to make sure things were going smoothly. While waiting for these asshats, I got thirsty and went up front to grab a drink. One of the bowlers saw me and began what would make an interesting night. Him, what are you doing up here? Me, held up the drink as I'm heading back towards the door to the machine shop. Him, yeah, you need to stay back there where you belong. Me, you have a problem or your ball's stuck? Him, no, everything is working. You just need to do your job. Never mind that if everything is working, then my job is being done. But this little exchange had pissed me off, so I stood in the back waiting until he bowled with the brand new ball he had just bought a couple weeks before. When the ball made it onto the shaker board and into the back of the machine, I snatched it up and grabbed a hammer that we had around the shop that had the claw part broken off. I intended to use it to put a little nick in the guy's ball or something that would annoy him, but ultimately not be any big deal. Apparently, I picked the exact right spot to hit the ball that caused a quarter of the ball to chunk off. Out of all the places to hit, I tapped the magic fault line that broke the entire ball. At this point, I panicked and threw the ball back into the return to go up front and ran to the huge warehouse behind the machine shop that was full of junk. I threw the chunk of ball as hard as I could into a pile of junk far away from any walking path and ran back into the shop to sit there and wait. After what seemed like an eternity but was only minutes, I heard, "What the duck?" from up front, and the lane shut down. Apparently, something had come loose in the underground track the balls return on, and his ball had hit whatever it was and been damaged. My friend working the front desk came over the loudspeaker telling me they were moving, and then after a while came back there talking about how crazy it was. He just about pissed himself laughing when I told him what I had done, and the icing on the cake was that the owners refused to replace the ball. Dude being an idiot and me being a larger junk cost him about $300. This was not my only run-in with that guy, but the only one that ended up in him losing a bowling ball. The other run-ins just got his bowling ball pissed on before it was sent back to him. I was not a very nice teenager. Story 4. I work at a research institution. I sent an email to a big shot professor in which each word was written in a different font, different size, and different color. Why? He asked me to send him a reminder on Monday and to really annoy me so I don't forget. Luckily, he thought it was awesome. Story 5. Once I responded to an email from a coworker that sent an email to our group and said, "Whoever got the answer right gets a Coke." I replied all to the thread with the correct answer and said, "Thanks, I'll take a gram." Upper management didn't find this as amusing as I did. I still think it's funny. I have so many unprofessional things it's hard to recount. Once when I was working at a call center and I was texted my boyfriend that I loved him, I answered the call to the customer by stating, "Thank you for calling your community bank. How may I love you?" I laughed so freaking much, totally creeped the guy out. It was great. I am a shock seeker. One time I was working on an estimate on a car that was wrecked at a body shop. One of our regular customers pulled in. I was about 3-4 months pregnant. I always try to make people laugh. My belly was finally starting to show a bit. He said, "See, I told you we should have stuck to the foreplay." I replied, "Or sex," and just walked off laughing. I've accidentally left the phone unmuted on accident, calling the customer a dumb duck and thought I had it on mute. Another time I was being a troll with a coworker and yelled, "Oh yeah, well your mom sits on my face," right at the time the heavy machinery cut off long enough for everyone to hear. Same job. I kind of got in trouble for this one. The cooks were asking about the leftover food from the cafeteria. He was kind of a nerd. I loved to give him a hard time. He tossed a hard roll at me. I caught it and proceeded to punt it like a football. But my aim so ducking good, I managed to drop kick it and punt it right into his eye. I cried in laughter so hard. I still laugh thinking of that story. The manager thought it was pretty funny, but also had to reiterate it's not okay to kick rolls. That's all I can think of at the moment. I know everyone has finger gets sex in a closet or sucked in the break room. So basically, I'm the ample employee. Oh yeah, and I have a master's in business to make it funnier. Story 6. I'm not sure if this counts, but I work in reality television. One day I was working on a show and one of our characters said that girl gave me a BJ last night. The lawyers wanted to make sure that was true and that we weren't slandering the poor girl. So I was tasked with confirming the BJ. There were a few rules. I could not watch footage in anything faster than real time, just in case I missed her leaving and a new girl who looked similar arriving. I had to be able to demonstrate continuous chain of custody of the girl from the moment she signed the TV waiver up to when the blowjob occurred. If the BJ occurred under bed covers, it did. I had to have continuous chain of custody of the girl from the time she entered the bed up until she exited it the next morning, which again, I had to watch in real time. So I watched about 3 hours of our cast member and this girl fumbling around drunkenly with one another's clothes and under the covers BJ, and then them sleeping for like 5 more hours before she finally got up and left. It was both boring and gross all at once. After confirming BJ, I told the executive producer that it was confirmed. He told the lawyers. The lawyers told him he had to confirm it as well. So if that first 8-hour session wasn't uncomfortable enough, I then had to do it again the next day with my boss sitting next to me watching alongside. So gross, so awkward. After we reconfirmed the BJ, we told the lawyers. They demanded a DVD copy, the perverts. Story 7. Worked in a condo that has a glorified gym. Bunch of millionaires and wealthy stuck-up individuals that had no regard for human life that worked there. The staff had access to showers and the same amenities at one point before we were told we no longer did because the residents complained we shouldn't be allowed to, which in itself we were told during our interviews. Part of our only benefits we had was being able to utilize the amenities. I still would shower though before and after my shift. The residents would see and wouldn't mind. They were fine with it because I was pretty cool. Back to being treated like crap by some residents. I'd take a crap in the shower, crap in the toilets without flushing, and sometimes shower. Wipe my ass with the entire towel and fold it back and put it with the new towels were for those holes to use. My best friend was a lifeguard and the pool was ridiculously sized. There was a hot tub right next to him. He had an area, an elevator shaft that didn't work behind him, where he'd go and piss inside a big bucket because they weren't allowed breaks to eat or to use restroom breaks if no one could cover them. He'd take the bucket of piss and throw it in the hot tub or pool. While we watched those holes enjoy their time in there and treat us like crap. He became an NYPD officer and I became a case manager. We would do it all over again, 10-10. Also, the other staff members would also be in on it too. Crafting and not flushing, etc. One example of how badly treated we were, this lady would come in and make our life miserable every 9:45 p.m. Screaming and yelling at us for no reason, threatening us, etc. Story 8. A few years back, I was working a contract job as a photographer hired to take and edit up photos of cheap Chinese garbage aimed at dumb geriatrics who had more money than sense and wanted gaudy garbage to clutter up their homes. Crap like picture frame, Christmas decorations that you could shove photos into and whatnot, as well as to update and implement a new advertising strategy. Owner had some mad, severe anger issue. He'd be super nice one moment, then flip his crap the next, usually over something totally inconsequential. Made some poor kid quit on his first day for not knowing something that he had no way of knowing since, it was his first day. I was getting close to the end of my contract, 1 month of 6 left, and I overhear this dude crafting on me and my job performance. Items that I had taken new photos of were selling 15-20% more than previously BTW for using my phone too much. I was using it as a camera because the one I was provided was a 3-megapixel digital camera from the Stone Ages and called me a lazy Californian. So I wrote up a quick resignation letter and was not tactful in explaining why I was canceling my contract. Opened up the side of my work computer and used a paperclip to short out a few contacts on the CPU, but not before running a few passes of a data destruction tool on the second hard drive that had all the graphics this company used. They did not use any sort of backup system. Then, I just walked out saying I was taking my lunch and never came back. Story 9. Oh, I've got tons of these. Used to work at a state park campground. Was not very busy most of the time. So if you got the few things you needed to do done, you had almost the entire shift to goof off. Too lazy to give all the stories, but here are a few. One of my favorite things to do on a closing shift was set up Smash Bros under the counter on my laptop. Managers went home at 4:30, so there was nobody around who gave a crap. There was a bicycle pump in the office to inflate some footballs or volleyballs and crap we lent out. When nobody was around, my coworkers and I would poke a hole in the cap of a water bottle and pump it like a rocket inside the office. Was surprised to find that you could pump some bottles to around 80 psi before the cap seal failed and popped off. The bottles would bloat like a balloon and fly faster than your eyes could follow. Sometimes you had to sit in the park's toll booth. During the week, almost nobody would visit the place, so you could sit there and watch several movies or binges a whole TV series in a day. Best job I ever had. Got paid minimum wage to duck around with my friends all day. Would highly recommend working at a state park. I left the place because after college, I had offers for real jobs in the field. I studied, but nothing's ever gonna beat my first job at the park, and I miss it. Story 10. Work in engineering. Designer Do met between his fingers to stay wired in his cube, pumping out designs 10 to 12 hours a day. Engineer got wasted at a golf outing and crashed his golf cart into a sand trap. VP of a department got promoted over a guy that felt slighted, and they had a drunk fistfight at the office after the same golf outing. Corporate managers thought it would be funny to buy everyone butt plugs for Christmas. Me. I was in the 4th consecutive burnout 60-plus hour week and in full-on zombie mode. I had pretty much given up on life and committed to sitting down like a girl to pee. I wasn't paying attention and accidentally pissed all over the floor while someone was in the stall next to me. Guy quickly got up and left without saying a word and never spoke of it to anyone. Story 11. I used to work for a video production company owned and operated by a troubled man that struggles with alcohol addiction. I could fill a book with absurd situations this guy put his employees in. The one that sticks out to me as most WTF was when he had to set up a time-lapse recording rig in his girlfriend's house, pointed out the window toward the driveway to monitor this pile of water cooler water bottles that had been delivered and abandoned in front of her house in this upper-middle-class cul-de-sac. He and his girlfriend were convinced that her ex-husband had been tampering with her water by putting watch batteries in her water cooler bottles before she could bring them from the curb into her house, and only round-the-clock surveillance could crack the case. The time-lapse ran for nearly a week. Then I had to review the footage and compile a video containing any vehicles that approached her house. I spent hours and hours going through footage and editing it together to send to him. He was pretty deep in a binge and couldn't manage to come into the office. After sending all vehicle footage to him, which included no instances of anyone touching these bottles of water, he called me and asked where the footage of the ex tampering the water was. I told him I provided everything captured. He drunkenly croaked, "I think you're in on this," and hung up on me. I doubt he remembers any of the whole ordeal. Story 12. I like to consider the vast majority of my work life unprofessional. Lots of pranks, mockery, Photoshop shenanigans, etc. There's a handful I am amazed did not result in my termination. Example. I had this idiot foreman who became foreman because of who he knew. He was the kind of guy who let any kind of authority go to his head. He was universally despised by all his subordinates. One day, I happened to be working in the same room as him, and he was bragging to another coworker about how awesome he was. "Man," he said, "I'm really crushing it at this job. The only way I could do any better is if there was 2 of me." I could not resist. It just flew out of my mouth. "Yeah, Dave, then you could go duck yourself." One coworker in the room erupted into hysterics. Foreman Dave? He looked like someone had run over his dog. I never got in trouble. Never even had the incident mentioned by any higher-ups. When I left the job sometime later, I was told I was a good employee, but sometimes disrespectful of management, so I knew then he had said something to someone. Story 13. Probably 10 years ago when I was driving my bus, myself and a friend were driving in the same route in opposite directions, so we would pass each other every 30 minutes or so. Anyway, it started as each of us passed each other, we would lean out of the window and shout junk to each other. I then stuck a label to my head with junk written on it. He laughed so much. It kept on escalating with each of us driving past each other with bigger and bigger signs of junk written on labels on our heads. One of the best night shifts I've had. So much laughter, but definitely unprofessional. Story 14. I was a shift manager at a pizza place. We played a game we called Quick Junk. On a whiteboard, one person would draw a quick junk, so nothing elaborate or detailed. A coworker would then come over and have unlimited time to turn the junk into a picture of something else. Only rules were the junk couldn't be used as a nose in the final image. Too basic. The funniest one was a worm coming out of a hole in a tree eating a leaf. Side note, the game originated when one of my employees kept drawing junks on boxes while dating inventory and putting the truckload away. When I'd try to scribble over the junks, you could still see the junk through the scribble, so I started turning them into pictures. Story 15. Worked in a burrito store for summer uni fun. Pigeons try steal food leftovers outside, ended up being attacked by one, and in panicked response, unceremoniously grabbed it and threw it into a nearby table. Customers seemed more confused and amused than anything. Story 16. I used to have a job where I traveled a crazy amount. It was a 25% travel job, which is not bad, but the way it ended up that year is the last 3 months of the year I was on the road the whole time. So I was in Bahrain for a month and had to fly home to Chicago for a few days, then go to Bologna to get prodded by a hot Italian doctor, and finally someplace else to go offshore. I also want to remind you I'm making the company a crap ton of money during this time period. To expedite things, it's way better to get a blood test in the USA. Then I don't need to get one in Italy. The lazy project manager who I had a problem with refused to make an appointment for me. I was pissed and wrote an email out, you already got a pound of flesh out of me, and you can't even get me a vial of my own blood. It's not like I'm going to even enjoy getting stuck with a needle. I, of course, got in trouble for this. The good news is the next year, he got sacked, so his wholeness did catch up to him. Story 17. I'm not quite sure the origins of this, but we had a styrofoam stick taped in Minion stickers we called the Minion stick that my boss would use on us whenever we screwed up or pissed him off. Of course, it was all in good fun, but we sort of ran a little too far with it. He found this awful Minion meme, I think from the wacky Tic Tacs subreddit, that had a picture of a minion followed by "Your suffering will be legendary even in hell," that he framed and put on his cube wall. Underneath it, he mounted his Minion stick to be used anytime one of us complained about work schedules or just said something stupid overall. The best beating I got was from the time I switched his name tag on his cubicle with my other coworkers, and the maintenance guys came in and fixed the wrong whiteboard, thus knocking down the Minion stick. This was all some years ago, and everyone has since moved on. But still, those beatings may have been unprofessional, but made work life so much more enjoyable. Story 18. I used to work at a hotel as a houseman. It was a decent job until they put me on the night shift in spite of my protests that I wasn't available for that. Working nights is easy enough, but I didn't get a job there with the idea that I'd be working nights for the next X years. After they revealed that I wouldn't be getting my old shift back, I started slacking off hardcore. Every night, I would restock the soap carts for room turnover in the morning. All of the supplies for this were in one big closet. I had my routine down and knew that I had a lot of space to slack off, in addition to a half-hour break. Sometimes I'd sleep in that closet for 2 hours straight. One time, the guys at the front desk told me they'd been trying to reach me for 2 hours. I just looked at my radio and fiddled with the channel switch like, crap, I must have been on the wrong channel all night. Kinda wonder how many hours I was paid to sleep in total. Story 19. The Office was in its first season, and I'd watched the harassment episode just a couple weeks before we had our harassment training. The entire attitude of the training was really unprofessional, with the trainer making jokes about what harassment is and isn't, and the ladies from my work were playing right along with it. I thought that maybe it wasn't something the company cared about as much as they let on. So when the form came around, sign off on that, you'd taken the training and understood what it meant, I signed it as Daffy Duck. A week later, I am called into my boss's office. She is really pissed and was like, "They want me to fire you for this," and handed me the form with Daffy Duck as my signature. I apologized, signed a new form with my real name on it, and kept my job. Story 20. In the late 90s, I was working in a storeroom at a steel mill. Now, for some unknown reason, the storeroom, mobile equipment, and Miss It all fell under the QA dept. It started after work someday. We would all go down to the QA labs and have a LAN party play Warcraft. Because we all fell under QA, we were allowed in the labs, but nobody else, not security, not even the shift supervisors of the rolling mill or melt shop allowed in QA lab, so we had no chance of getting caught. We worked a swing shift, so the gaming went from after shift to during our third shift. Now this part wasn't me. The mobile equipment operators started shotgunning beers when they switched off. To get rid of cans, they would toss them on the hot steel billets. One day, security turned the corner as they were recycling their cans. Nothing was ever said to me or the QA guy, but the next day, the games were deleted from the computers. Story 21. I was a server at Spaghetti Factory years ago, and it was super busy. I had a table of 15, and they were treating me like crap. I dropped a salad plate on the floor and it shattered. The whole table started to laugh at me, and I couldn't take it anymore. I said, "Oh yeah, you think that's funny?" I threw another salad plate on the floor and said, "What about that? Think that's funny?" I proceeded to throw 4 or 5 more plates on the floor. The whole party was shocked and staring in disbelief. I walked off and figured I was about to be fired but didn't care. My manager came up to me and said, "What was that? You're fired. Go home." I said, "Good," and threw my apron on the counter. He ran over to me and said, "I was kidding. Take a deep breath. You're not fired." He got another server to finish waiting on the a-holes. Duck that place. People treat servers like crap. Story 22. I used to work the night, 6:30 till 9:30 p.m., shift at an adult school while I was at uni. It was mostly just so people could learn basic French, Spanish, art, etc. Me and the other guy working there had very little to do other than ensure classes ran smoothly, teachers received and returned registers and the like. When we got bored of the internet, and it was before smartphones were everywhere, So we started developing increasingly elaborate treasure hunts for the next day's staff to uncover. We started building in dead ends where obvious but wrong solutions would take you down 3 more clues to be told you'd messed up. Before I left, I got told by my manager that me and my colleague were to be written up for it at the area manager's request. They'd turned up mid-hunt one day, but my manager enjoyed them too much, so had held off. We made one last huge hunt on my last night that took them the whole next day to crack. Story 23. Job 1. Waiting tables, Friday night around 10 p.m. I was the FOH closer, so I was the last server on. Table comes in with child and high chair. I had had a long night, and I knew the table wouldn't be a great tip, but still did a good job. When I brought out the entrees, after about 4 refills in a short period of tome, she asked for a spoon for the baby. On my way back to the table with another round of drinks and a spoon, I realized it was dirty and needed a new one. Dropped off the drinks and was beginning to say, I noticed the spoon I grabbed wasn't completely clean, when she cut me off and scoffed, "No spoon? You need to take better care of people's kids." To which I replied that I took great care of her kid every year by paying my taxes. They got free meals that night. Job 2. Sex at work. Manager. Sex at work. Owner. Story chapter 4. I worked my second real day at a retail job when I was in my early 20s, was at the cash register one day. Dealt with an irate customer who decided to throw coins at the counter, so I had to pick them up off the floor. I asked her to stop. She continued and called me a name, at which point I threw all of their merchandise on the ground from the counter, walked out, never came back, even to pick up what little money I'd earned of a paycheck. Just left the awful customer, the counter, and the store to handle itself. Story 25. I work as a gardener. I ended up accidentally falling asleep in a shed. I used to take breaks, eat lunch on a housing estate once, and was discovered by the manager there. He was pretty chill about it, thankfully. Another time I was contracted to be on site at an office complex garden for 2 hours, but the work only took 15 minutes at most, but I'd still have to be on site just sitting there. So one day I decided to go window shopping at a nearby mall, and when I got back, the facilities manager was absolutely livid at me. Story 26. They started using some crafty time tracking system. Instead of giving us a username and password, we got a new link with a unique ID in the URL every month, so bookmarking wasn't really an option. I tried several angles convincing them that it's stupid. Final one was that it's ridiculous to have sensitive data accessible to everyone who gets access to the direct link, to which they said it's not sensitive data. So I did the only obvious thing. I set up a Twitter account, had a script scan incoming mails, and tweet the links when found. That way it'd be easy for me to just get the latest link. As a courtesy, I've also informed HR about the Twitter account. Turns out, they thought the information accessible there is sensitive after all. And a lot of people suddenly got very angry at me. Story 27. Super tame. But back when I worked in retail during uni, I had one supervisor that was just overly picky and annoying and often blamed her mistakes on us. I'd managed to keep things fairly polite, but I was nearing a breaking point. I was serving a customer, and this supervisor came over to tell me to do some crap that I'd already done. I forget the specifics. I confirmed that it was all good and taken care of, but she disapproved of the way I'd done it. That was when I, 22 minutes at the time, said in my most exaggerated mocking voice, "Well, excuse me, princess." The customer and supervisor looked at each other in horror at my apparent sexism, while I tried to explain the reference, but needless to say, I received a mild slap on the wrist from the manager the next day. Story 28. Oh, this just brought back a memory. Was working my first office job. At the end of the day, my coworkers and me, about 6 of us, were waiting at the elevator with one of the lower-ranked managers in the office. Everyone was joking about sex-related stuff, and manager said, "When you're in a good long-term relationship, you don't do HJ, you get someone to do it for you." And my stupid 20-year-old brain decided to say, "Ha, who do you get to do it for you?" "Your sister." Everyone at the elevator. You could feel the atmosphere thicken like the air in a tropical rainforest. I got crap for that for the longest time. He was in charge of logistics of sending us eat guys on call-outs. Guess who got the crappiest call-outs for a while? I was so ducking stupid. Story 29. My whole job is unprofessional. I'm a security guard at a mega church. Everyone sees me as this young man of God who works hard with a smile and cares about everyone he meets. Bullcrab. I'm not religious. I don't work harder than I have to, and I don't give a damn about the pastor who walks around like he's God himself. I spend my day working out in the gym downstairs, playing Xbox One in the youth room, and watching YouTube and Netflix the remainder of the day. I'm 22, I make $16 an hour, I get 40+ hours a week, and I'm on track to be the department head in a year. I put up an amazing front, but I don't take this thing serious at all. Still the boss's favorite employee by far. Story 30. I had to piss in a sink because we don't have bathrooms in my building, and the nearest one that does is 100 yards away. I work in a clean room, so it takes a lot of time to get in and out of my suit properly, And by the time I was out, I couldn't hold it, so I went to the sink in the changing room. I have kidney issues, so it always seems like the urgency goes from 0 to 100 real quick. The building is older than most modern building codes, so it's grandfathered in and doesn't have to have a toilet. It has been humiliating, even though I'm usually the only one around. Story 31. Not very interesting, but at my first job when I was 17, a coworker, 19, and I decided to stay after close for about an hour and a half under the guise of deep cleaning the dish area. Another coworker showed up, off the clock and high as balls. All three of us just sort of sat on the still wet floor of the back and talked. It was gross, wet, and cold, but it's still one of my favorite memories. We mostly talked about substances we've tried and some other real personal crap, like the self-harm addiction that was running my life at that point. The other two were quite close, but I didn't know them that well. It was nice to spill some of my deeper secrets in a time when I didn't have anyone to go to. Story 32. I worked at a web marketing company. One day my project manager was being quite Karen, not that this was abnormal, and nothing anyone did was good enough. She would just nitpick absolutely everything. At some point, she tries to start an argument with me about something really small, like the color of a heading or something. I had really had enough of her at this point, so I turned to face her and stuck out my tongue at her, complete with the fart-like noise a 5-year-old might make when sticking out their tongue. Turned back to my computer and kept working. It was a really childish thing to do, but it just felt so liberating. As a bonus, there were 0 repercussions. It's not super unprofessional, but it's the worst thing I can remember doing. Story 33. Not really for me, but I used to work in a kids center and I had a really nice coworker. One week we were preparing a kind of party for the children and their family for the weekend, so all week we would look after some things and one was rubber duck that you have to catch with a stick with a hook. So my coworker went to look for them while I was looking after the teenagers. They were making DIY with hot glue, so someone had to be with them. And my coworker came back 20 minutes later, handing one of the duck and told me, "Hey, I finally found your sex toy." Yup, in front on the teenager. Aurel, I still hate you for that. Story 34. Our project team went to dinner about 3 miles up GA 400 from our hotels. We took 2 cars. After dinner, getting back onto GA 400, our boss driving the other car cut us off getting onto the on-ramp. So we floored it, passed him on the right, and then, like total freaking idiots, raced each other back to the hotel parking lot. We won, so like total freaking idiots, we slipped into the conference room in the hotel where our meetings were taking place and changed the first page on his flip chart to read, "Second place is the first loser." So not just unprofessional, but really stupid, childish, reckless, and dangerous. Story 35. I worked at a rec center and we're doing laps in the weight room, making sure no one had any questions. To pass time, we were doing the bottle flip challenge when my manager got the idea to bottle flip a wet floor sign. The foot of the sign shattered on impact, and plastic shards went flying past people's faces. My apology to them was, "I'm sorry my manager is such a ducking git." Story 36. Here we go. I work at an office for a construction company, and usually I'm either the only one there or the last one to leave. At home, I have 0 peace and quiet. So one day, shortly after Borderlands 3 came out, I decided to bring my PlayStation to work. Again, I was the only one in the office and didn't have much to do, so I basically spent most of my day and even well into the evening playing Borderlands 3 on the big screen TV we have in our conference room. I had to tell the wife I was swamped with work and stayed late. Story 37. Was working as a pastry chef on a really fancy art hotel in a large city in the South. This was the kind of place where you plated food with tweezers, really expensive and fancy. There was an Australian sous chef who was a huge a-hole, but was allowed to do what he pleased. One day, during service, I opened a small refrigerator and edible flowers spilled all over the floor. As I'm scrambling to clean them up, he calls me a stupid. I stood up, grabbed my knife off the pastry counter and swiped all the ingredients on the floor and walked out without a backward glance. I could hear him yelling and cursing, but I didn't care. Story 38. I used to work at a summer camp. I was in charge of planning the nightly events for the kids. One of the jobs we had to schedule was people who would walk the line, which pretty much consisted of walking around the perimeter of the camp and making sure that everyone was they were supposed to be and not having sex in the woods. Whenever I was into a girl, I would send my wingman best friend and the girl I was into to walk the line, and he would get intel for me and talk me up. It worked multiple times. I was also high at that job 24/7, but I think it made me a better employee, honestly. Story 39. My job is a hellscape. Pretty much every moment at a customer isn't within earshot. My supervisor and I are discussing things inappropriate for work or just how much we hate that place and want to die. But I'd say the best recent example is texting my supervisor while being lectured by my manager about credit card sales. But we don't push products. Sure, Jan. That's why you physically bar people from leaving until they take a credit card brochure and asking him to bring me some arsenic on his way back from lunch so I could put myself out of my misery. He responded with a picture of himself holding a bottle of bleach, saying he was on his third glass already. Story 40. I worked at a country club in high school as a kind of groundskeeper front desk guy for the tennis courts, both indoor and outdoor. Basically, I just kept everything clean and greeted folks. Sometimes there were two people on the job, one indoor guy and one outdoor guy. Right behind our outdoor courts was a shed with some light equipment, so my coworker and I would go back there and smoke pot on the job. It was awesome when it was slow because the tennis shop had a nice big TV I could change the channels on. When I was exclusively working outside and it was nice, I would just take a nap in a golf cart by the shed. Story 41. I was working as a shift manager at McDonald's. During dinner time, a bunch of teenagers came into the restaurant to order 30 cheeseburgers. They were laughing their asses off to see us working even harder because of their order. I was getting annoyed at my job, and especially of these customers' behavior, so I took a chance, making a leap of faith that a bunch of teenagers would not make an official complaint about me to my boss and yelled, "You think it's funny? Laughing at us for making your huge order?" They shut up instantly and even apologized. I felt like a badass, and it had no aftermaths. I gave my notice 2 months later. Story 42. Not a job, but a couple years ago, me and my brother decided to hold a yard sale and get rid of some stuff we never use. Well, my brother had this mini football, and some kids came by, and we were only selling the football for like 75 cents, and they gave us a quarter and took off. I noticed it wasn't the right amount, and me being an idiot, I went and grabbed my baby brother's tricycle and knocked the kid off his rollerblades after chasing them down. Needless to say, we got the football. He didn't like us. And a couple months later, he tried to shave our cats since he was our neighbor. Story 43. When I was in the military, I worked at the military hospital for a little while. I was given a box full of random dirty DVDs. There were, I would guess, around 30-ish DVDs, so I took them to work. My office was mostly males. I am female BTW. I let a few people know and word got around. By the end of the day, it was empty. I let them pick and grab what they wanted, never looking to see who got what. But there was some funny stuff in there. Story 44. I fell and hit my head really hard. Nearly instantly sprouted a cartoon-esque bulge. After a bit, it started to drain downward, giving me huge black eye. At the time, I worked in a mailroom. I'm a pretty shy and quiet, so I didn't take too kindly when the office decided to make a big deal out of it in front of like 50 people and cracking jokes. Anywho, she moved to a new house, and I may have misplaced her change of address form she was trying to mail out about 4 times. Took a couple of months for her to finally just throw it in a different outgoing mail and receive her mail properly. Story 45. I'm a night shift supervisor for an industrial cleaning company, which is contracted to clean a huge food distribution center. At 3 a.m., everything was done, so I gave everyone their tasks that'd take them 4 hours and went for my break. I fell asleep in my car and woke up at 7 a.m., and when the manager came in for 8, he thanked me for the great work that had been done the night before. I literally slept through the whole shift, and I got thanked for it. FW, my job is easy as duck, and I get paid $18 an hour to do duck all. Story 46. Work pizza. Lady called when I had 3 drivers and a screen full of orders. Says she's been waiting an hour and a half for her order. She's only been waiting 40 minutes and her order was out on delivery. I tell her as such. She asks if we still do a 30 minutes or less promotion. Not our company has never done that. Well, something still needs to be done according to her. I tell her I'm unable to fix anything, but if her or anyone she knows is looking for a job, we are always accepting application. I got a customer complaint. Story 47. I worked at a Walmart in Canada a long time ago, and in the little plaza there was a Montana's across the parking lot, so me and a guy from the deli department would go and have dinner and down a few beers. I remember we did 6 pints one night, and we came back drunk, and the washroom was on the complete other side of the building from where our departments were. So we pissed in the drains at the entrance to the refrigerator, and we were going once every 10 to 15 minutes. So it was just a steady stream of steamy piss. Good time. Story 48. Supposedly did a Michael Jackson-style hip thrust in front of an HR assistant as I was asking her about some work-related thing. She promptly filed a complaint that got me fired for harassment. When they called me into the meeting to inform me of my termination, they didn't even give me a chance to explain myself. She was 8 months pregnant at the time, but apparently pregnancy-related mood swings are considered a myth around that office. Doesn't matter, the place was a revolving door of incompetence and hubris anyways and had been bleeding talent since before I even got there. Story 49. I used to work at this hole-in-the-wall Subway inside a Walmart. Our main cash flow were from customers buying popcorn. It was normally dead, could go up to 3 hours without a single customer. One of my other coworkers have completed essays and taken full naps in the back. I, on the other hand, ripped dab pen in the back and once put up a "Be back in 15 min" sign and left to go home and bring keys to my brother. It was more like 45 minutes. Came back to a regular demanding popcorn. Wasn't fired. Story 50. When I worked at a long-term care facility in nursing school, I used to kiss my residents goodnight and tell them that I loved them and meant it. As a nurse in a more acute hospital setting, I would never kiss a patient goodnight. But long-term care is a different world. Story 51. When I was a mechanic, I was making a few doors for an elevator. Not fixing, actually making it. Usually, we put a piece of tape on the object we made with our name on it to see who made it. After about 8 doors, I made a mistake, the same one on each door. Instead of fixing every door, I removed the tapes with my name on it. Our 2 shifts didn't get along very well, and there were a lot of accusations. The crap show that unraveled after this was unbelievable. Story 52. I once spent all day working on a project and brought another developer in to help me. She added some data to the output so we could see the changes we were making. The data she added happened to be the name of an adult store in town. Finally, we get everything working. I replace the original data file, run the application, create the PDF samples, double-check they don't have the bad data, and then proceed to zip up and send the samples with the bad data to the client for proofing. Talking to my boss the next day was interesting. Story 53. It was 5 p.m. My shift was up, but my relief hadn't arrived yet. Instead of waiting for my relief, I stood up, told the busload of passengers that the relief driver wasn't there yet and to have a good night. I then got off the bus, abandoning my passengers, and started walking up the block. Wait, no, that wasn't me. That was the ducking bus driver on my route last night. A hole. Story 54. This happened a year ago in the restaurant I was working for. Our boss asked us to cook a good $200 worth of meat and brown sauce in a big pot. When our boss tried to take the pot out of the oven, the whole thing fell on the ground. Cooked meat and brown sauce everywhere. He then asked us to put water on the meat to clean it. We kept the meat, but made new brown sauce. The meat was then used for a marriage. Story 55. I worked at a notable fast food restaurant during high school with my friends. We all had the same schedule, same breaks, and same time off. Needless to say, we'd show up stoned off our asses, go smoke more in the walking freezers, vapes, smoke on our breaks, then go home and smoke that night. Makes sense why your orders are always wrong. Also, one time I threw a potato at the wall and watched it explode. Manager came back and was like, "Who the duck did it?" We all denied it, and all was fine. Story 56. I came into work for the night shift after an evening in Pattaya, Thailand. Being exhausted from the lack of sleep, I took over, switched on my alarm clock to wake me before the end of my shift, put my hard hat over my eyes, abs fell asleep on my desk. At the end of my shift, my boss came, and because of my alarm clock, he didn't even notice I slept during my entire shift. Went home for my holiday that same day. I've never told anyone that. Not my proudest moment. Story 57. Worked at a pizza place for a while, both in store and doing deliveries. One night I was closing with a friend and the supervisor brings us into the walk-in freezer to smoke. It's completely airtight and the smoke will be filtered out by morning, he said. But the smell sure didn't. Also had to deliver coupons to local businesses to encourage people to take their lunch break at our place. I just drove home and played a game of League of Legends, then came back. Story 58. I had just started a new job answering phones and was having a conversation with a coworker about a girl he found on Tinder who was using a very popular star's pictures. I answered the next call with, "Hello, thank you for calling dirty," because I'm an idiot. Story 59. We had a couple of employee fridges for lunch, etc., and I distributed my food in small parcels across them, with my name spelled slightly differently on each label to confuse everyone. Story 60. Screaming DBZ or Pokemon noises with my coworker. Worked in a DIY store at the time. It was around 6 when most PPL are at home eating or on their way home, so store was kinda empty. I still remember 7 years later, his Togepi impression. The one which goes like, "Toka Toke, manager," did not like it and was very angry. Whoops. Still, it was fun to be Togepi, or use the Kamehameha on each other. Story 61. When I was in college, I used to lifeguard in the summer. After we closed the final weekend, the guards would have guard games in the pool for just employees. I pre-gamed hard, like I had to have someone drive me to the pool. I show up hammered drunk. One of my friends asks who reeks of booze, and I tell him to shut up, it's me. I kicked everyone's ass in every event I was in, even the swim team kids. Good times. Story 62. As a waiter, I threw away some psychopath Karen Monster's phone after she disrespected me the entire time I was serving her, and then stiffed me. "Your phone?" "Nope, haven't seen it. Check with the hotel lost and found. Got away with it, don't regret it, would do it again." Story 63. I worked at Walmart and it was the most boring experience of my life. One day, they let me be the greeter. You know, the guy who greets people who come in. Anyways, the janitor leaves his broom, so I pick it up and start swinging it around pretending I'm Robin. People are just watching me do kicks and fighting the air and crap, and then my manager comes and loses her mind on me. That surprisingly was not the day I was fired. Story 64. Pretty much the entirety of my 2-year stint on third shift at a convenience store. Played home run derby in-store with a plunger and a tinfoil ball. Played floor hockey with a pair of brooms and another tinfoil ball. Had a wrestling match in-store. Played creamer basketball, which was more of a free throw contest. Constantly gave away free food and drinks. Numerous pranks on the store manager. Despite all of that, I was the store manager's favorite employee. Story 65. Walmart during grad school. One night, sporting goods was slow. I picked up the intercom line on the phone and paged the following all over the store. Attention, Walmart associates. Will the associate in charge of pets please come to receiving to pick up the tarantulas and rattlesnakes? Again, the associate in charge of pets. Please come to receiving for the tarantulas and rattlesnakes. Sorely disappointed because there was zero reaction from anyone. Story 66. Not at work technically, but got way too hammered and bought a pack of cigarettes and started smoking them in front of a couple MDs at my firm. I'd like to say I never drank that much at a work event again, and that's true, but I've also gotten hammered enough to the point that my thick native accent starts coming out. This happened recently, and I've decided to limit myself to only 3 drinks at work events from here on out. Story 67. I work in human resources for a fairly large company. I'm in charge of promotions, terminations, performance reviews, disciplinary actions. I've gotten stoned every single day I've worked here for over 5 years. I've had to fire people for using substances in the office, and I feel like a hypocrite, but it is part of my job, and most people were not being careful about being caught. I do feel like a hypocrite sometimes. Story 68. I very briefly, and with as dry a tongue as I could get, licked one of the rare books from the 1500s or 1600s I was digitizing so I could compete with my boyfriend for that, who's licked the oldest thing game. Story 69. During my time as a telemarketer, I got tipsy at lunch, but they didn't care because I ended up making my sales for the rest of the day. At my retail job, I showed up to work with a hangover. Then there was the time I gave away $80 worth of merchandise for free because I just stopped caring. They never found out and got promoted later. Stayed for an additional 3 years. This was 10 plus years ago. Story 70, called a shift leader. Large slew of nasty words after he told me to close dish after closing the dining room. Note, none of the dishes has been done at all that day. Should have been fired for what I said, but I got very lucky. Story 71. An executive ordered me in an email to do something completely useless and waste of someone's time for a PC that simply needed a BIOS update or re-image if that didn't work. My response to him in an email seen by 4 execs was this: why? That is pointless. He asked me, reinstall Office for a network connectivity issue. I had already checked cables, wall jack, Wi-Fi drivers, Ethernet drivers, and docking station drivers. Story 72. At my last job, I had this piece of equipment I was testing. It was stupid complicated to use and had a locking mechanism built into it to lock a refrigerator. Medication safety. Anyway, because I was the only person who knew how to work this stupid thing, those locked refrigerators were the perfect hiding place for my office whiskey, which we'd break out after certain bosses left the office. Story 73, obligatory. Not me, but a close friend of mine, and the current general manager of the restaurant I worked at with him, made a habit of ducking his wife on all our different prep tables and cook stations. He ducked on our bar once, but never in the dining room. Yes, they sanitized afterwards, but didn't make it any less awkward for me to make food on those tables after finding out. Story 74. I used to work in a restaurant as a bartender some time ago. On my last day, the manager left early because she had to go somewhere. Can't remember where. Once we were shut, which was about 11 p.m., I started making cocktails for the whole staff. It ended up 6 a.m., 4 of us still drinking, completely shirtless. God knows why. Boys and girls, the rest is history. Story 75. Oof, varies. 3 jobs ago. Ducked in the boss's office, restrooms, balcony, left a one-hitter weed pipe in the ashtray of the balcony. All that wasn't what got me fired. 2 jobs ago. Sleep in the office to get to earlier field calls sooner without traffic. 1 job ago. I was a saint. Current job. Very subtly vape wax in the office, but I always have coffee to hide the aroma. Story 76. Not at work per se, but I got absolutely trashed going out with some friends on a Saturday night and just barely made onto our flight Sunday afternoon to head out to a client site for a visit. Sat down on the plane next to my team's sales lead, and she could clearly still smell the alcohol on me and asked if I had a good night. Story 77. Got a BJ in the car wash office while drinking and playing cards after I closed. Making a swastika out of gummy bears in a candy factory was a close second considering I got fired for both. Story 78. Not me, but while I was in hospital, I shared a room with a guy who couldn't walk. He was ringing the buzzer for help to the bathroom, and the nurse that's assigned to him was looking at houses on Zillow. It took her 20 minutes to come in. When she finally did, she complained he had wet the bed. Story 79. Have had pickle food fights and French fry food fights with coworkers at my first job and have told customers that were being unreasonable to get the duck out of my store and I don't get paid enough for their bullcrap. I was a manager. I love privately owned businesses. Left for a place that paid better, not cause I was fired. Story 80. Worked at a retail store when I was still in school. On the weekends, it would only be one or two other coworkers taking care of the store and no manager. It also wasn't very busy at times. I brought alcohol to work once and kept it in a bag in the fridge and would go take sips from the can every few minutes. Story 81. So many. I'm not sure what was the worst. Probably getting HR to approve me using the office on the weekend as a set for my friend's student film. Instead, we used the office and mainly the conference room to film a short video for a website I ran. Spoiler alert, a 12-pound fist sex toy made an appearance. Story 82. I rather ignominiously played Impale the Maggot with too much vigor and simulate their scream with my Instar stick over the decomposing cadaver I was extracting from. My boss and our pathologist both reproached me with identical expressions of contempt. For taciturn people, they certainly have an acerbic way of speaking to imply you're an idiot. I did not disagree. Story 83. My director was snowed by some whole consultant last month, so I had to collaborate with them. They inflated costs, missed deadline, gave me really lame designs and no engineering. I had to fight to get them to rein it in. In the middle of it, I told him, director, that they not only blew smoke up his ass, they added glitter. Story 84. I work in the service industry. One customer was being a complete ass. As she was leaving, she said, "I'm never coming back here again." And I blurted out, "Good, I never want to see you again." She rushed back and was like, "Excuse me?" Spoke to my manager. My manager just laughed. Couldn't believe I actually said it. Story 85. Years ago, worked at a big West Coast electronics store. A few of us in the department were watching Tosh. Oh, and he invented a game called Gatafeed, where you come up behind someone and yell Gatafee and shove something into their butthole region. We all agreed to play. Somehow, we never got playing that game, despite so many cameras there.